My name is Thomas Gregory Motta. I go by Greg, but a lot of the scouts from that period would have known me as Tom. And it's a side story really about how all that happened. And I'm an Eagle Scout from Troop 74 in North Dartmouth. My scoutmaster was Paul Seeger, great scoutmaster. I had an older brother, or still have an older brother, George Motta. And he was very, very big into scouting. He was on camp staff for years before me. I want to say we only overlapped like 1 or 2 years. When I was attending there first as a scout. And by that time, he was this big, huge, life-saving, I was some 11-year-old. You look on him as just your older brother at home, but you get to scout camp and suddenly he's part of this huge staff that sings all the way up the hill and does all these things and teaches all these other classes, and they grow in stature and importance to your life. And that was the case. And I think that certainly was, whether it was conscious or not, was part of what got me interested in joining camp staff. So 70 to 71, I went to camp first with my troop, and my dad sent us into provisional troop. And then in 73, I was a CIT, and I started out started like all CITs in the dining hall. I don't remember the chef. I thought it was a woman my first year, but maybe not. And then I very quickly, that summer, was sent to the waterfront because I was a strong swimmer, good swimmer, and I was assigned to help teach rowing. It was a backlog in rowing or something. And I stayed at the waterfront all those years after that. And I worked my way up. Then the working your way up was rowing instructor, and then swimming or canoeing, and then life saving. And then after that, they had, which was really kind of a euphemism, but assistant waterfront director, and then of course was waterfront director. But even at 78, I was not old enough, and they had hired a waterfront director. And at the last minute, he quit. I think he showed up like just a couple of days, and he quit. And I ended up becoming the waterfront director pro tem. And so I was called the waterfront director, but the truth is, you had to be 21. I think I was 20. And so the camp director was officially the waterfront director, but seldom could be on the waterfront. And so that was my last year. My first year as a CIT, the camp director was Fred Prefontaine. I think he had been a camp director a number of years before me when my brother George was on staff. But he came back. And the program manager, his name was St. Pierre. It was a CIT, so he just called him Mr. St. Pierre. And anyway, I think Aaron Lansky, he was a senior member. He was my patrol leader on the camp staff, and he was a great guy. He really definitely sticks out in my mind. He had boundless energy and enthusiasm, and he literally would jump around like Tigger with an idea, and he'd get all excited, and so he was really very motivated, especially to a young scout, to be a member of the staff and to be treated like you were part of this elite group of scouting. I would say, during that year, he was probably the most memorable. During the years, there were other scouts who were typically on waterfront and camp staff who I remember. But my most formative years was with Fred Prefontaine. My time as a CIT, they had this humongous military mixer with a massive bowl at the bottom. So when they made cake or brownies, things like that, they would, dump like, 60 boxes of mix in there and 3 dozen eggs and gallons of water. And this thing would mix for hours, and it would tilt, and you'd scoop it up in these big huge trays. but no matter how much you clear it, there was always substantial, just like at home when there's a mixing bowl, there's substantial leftover batter on the inside. And so whoever had finished their work first in the cafeteria as a CIT got first dibs on the bowl. You haul it outside, and you'd eat so much batter you'd be sick to your stomach within an hour. The remnants of this bowl. And then it was your job, of course, to wash it out and scrub it clean to cook satisfaction. But yeah, I have this recollection of sitting out on the back porch there with this bowl, and probably one of the other CITs with a spoon scraping off tons of batter with raw eggs. So I can remember amongst the camp staff, on the waterfront, there was Steve Popolars, who taught rowing and swimming a lot. And also Steve Rogers. Steve Rogers was from Fairhaven. He was a great guy, very active. He taught swimming. I think he was on the swim team or something in high school. He was a very, very good swimmer. Over in the nature area one year was Aaron Lansky's younger brother, Yale Lansky. And Yale, what I remember the most about him, and I think I have a photograph of this, is he would run these toad contests, where every troop would catch a toad, and then they would try to race them in a line. You couldn't touch the toad, but you have to yell them. And there's a picture of Aaron dressed up in a huge toad outfit. And what actually happens is he was hopping alongside all the toads, and he was wearing flippers, and he stomped on two of them. And Yale was such an animal lover. He was sick to his stomach for days about the event. And the scouts, of course, protested that he had stomped on their toad when it was in the lead. And so it was quite the controversy for the week. Who else was there? Well, the Escobar brothers, Mike and his older brother, whose name escapes me at the moment. I didn't know him as well, but Mike Escobar and I think we had met in the Combined Order of the Arrow, and we got to be good friends in that summer. He worked in pioneering and some other things. He was another of these guys who was always game for any kind of extracurricular activity, just boundless energy and enthusiasm, and dressing up in costumes or leading this group, something like that. There was another guy, Michael Swift. He was also from the Westport area. He was younger than us on staff, and I think he started out as a CIT. But he was also a great guy, hard worker, from what I recall. Scott Fenninger, yes, Scott Fenninger was on camp staff. I can't remember his positions, but I knew Scott Fenninger. I think from Camporese or something. And also, again, his family would bring their pets to my dad. His father was the principal over either Dartmouth Middle or Dartmouth High School. So they were very well known. And they lived only a few streets from Bishop Stang High School, where I went to high school. So I got to be good friends with Scott during those years. And we served on scouts and campouts. And I think even, camped together a number of times. I'm not sure if Scott's retired, but Scott's scouting career definitely informed the rest of his life. He became a National Park Service ranger, and last I knew was a National Park Service executive in charge of a region down either the Carolinas or Georgia. It was from our way of thinking, Waterfront was absolutely the best. You weren't, no matter how hot a day it was, you were on the water and you could just dive into the water and cool off in a second. You were in bathing suits, and you were also far and away the most tanned members of camp staff. And you didn't have these goofy Boy Scout tans, because in those days we wore knee socks. So the whole rest of the camp staff, only their knees were tan. Certainly my favorite memories are all tied to the waterfront. There's no doubt about that. There were a lot of good times in pioneering and some other things, but the waterfront really framed my camp experience. It was idyllic boyhood experience to spend week after week after week, swimming and canoeing and rowing and teaching life-saving skills. And so it formulated really a lot of my life later on. So much so that when I became an assistant scoutmaster and we would have to pick camps, to this day, I always try to get a core group of scouts to vote with me to vote down going to any camp that has a swimming pool. Because I think it's so critical that scouts, experience camp that swims in a natural lake and pond. I don't know if they still do that at camp, but you were required in order to get in the dining hall in the early years to buy a postcard at the post trading post and a stamp, and to have it written out to your folks. And some scoutmaster tell you, and it better say you're having a wonderful time. And you had to show the postcard to get into the dining hall. Now, of course, the camp staff, who had to be exemplary examples, and have their own postcards, frequently would just use the same postcard week after week after week. But yeah, I remember that was the main contact with families, was you had to write a postcard, I think on Tuesday, no less, because it would take 2 or 3 days to get home, and to assure the parents that that all was well and you were not so homesick that you wanted to go home. Yeah. The next camp staff director that I remember was Mike Vieira, who was an educator, I think, from the Fall River or Somerset, Swansea area. He was much quieter, but he was a lot of fun to work for, and very, very supportive of the staff, and very engaging. Yeah. So Mike Vieira's program manager was Robin Cambra. As I recall, I think he was an educator. He was also, an awful lot of fun. He was imaginative and very sportive. But those two during that period were, just full of a lot of energy, and they weren't afraid to try new program ideas during that time with the staff. And also, what I remember both under Fred Prefontaine and under Mike Vieira was there was a lot of singing compared to, I'm still in Scouts now, as you can see, but Scouts don't sing anywhere near as much as they used to. And the camp staff led the way by singing songs in those days, and singing songs marching up the hill at the parade field. You could hear the idea was that for the campers to hear the staff coming from a long distance off, so we have to bellow out a song while marching in formation up that hill. And I can remember being just totally out of breath the first week, trying to sing as loud as I could going up the hill for colors before dinner. Some of the songs, What Do You Do with a Drunken Sailor? What Oughtn't You, of course, was a favorite song. In my brother's day, and when I was a camper, Jeff Walliger was kind of renowned for that. And I think later Hambone picked up that torch for What Oughtn't You, if I recall correctly. It took someone with a real timbre in his voice to bellow that out. My brother George used to do it, and I think still can do it to this day. When I was a younger scout, We're on the Scouting Trail, which was a hiking song. It was done in rounds as you hiked along. I'm sure I could think of more, but those are the ones that pop in my head right away. And of course, in the background was always Armand Guilmette. Armand Guilmette, I knew outside of scouting, just kind of tangentially. He had a huge St. Bernard dog. At one point, I think he had 2. And my dad was a veterinarian in the city of New Bedford, and he would bring his dogs to my father. So I would see him periodically. I would help my dad in his veterinary clinic, and I would see Mr. Guilmette. And as a consequence, I think I got off better than most scouts, because he, for as remarkable a resource as he was, he really didn't play a role with regard to the scouts that were in camp. He was just plain known as the ranger, and if he told you to do something, you were to obey. And so he wasn't at the scout level, at least in my experience, to be very warm and fuzzy. And but to me, he would always say, "How you doing there, Mr. Motta. It's a good, but he was a tremendous craftsman. And for those of us in the waterfront, every winter he would build another couple of rowboats, or he'd repair the docks, or we would get something repainted, and it was all occurring, throughout the winter in his basement or in the work shed. So if you are on waterfront staff, you benefited greatly from the work of Armand Guilmette off season. Sure, but actually I want to tell another story, which I did a little research on. So there are certain memories I remember that stick out in my memory from camp. And one I thought was from camp, but I kind of went back and thought of it more. But I don't know if it was an OA weekend or whether it was a pre-camp staff weekend. There was obviously an official staff week before camp opened, where the staff would go and put up all the tents like that. But on occasion, there were work weekends where if you were an older scout, you could get permission to go to the camp and spend a weekend, and they would clean out the dining hall, or get all the benches down and kind of do some work in advance of the staff. And I went on one of these, and what I remember was in the middle of the night, the state police came into, or actually, I guess evening, it wasn't the middle of the night, but it came into the camp, and we were all called together. And there had been a horrific murder in Myles Standish State Forest. A woman was dismembered. And so they sent the police camp that was not that far from the front gate into the camp to corral up all scouts. And we had to camp in the center of the camp, and these troopers stayed, as I recall, overnight. They were gone by morning, and we all went home early. But it was one of the most restless nights I used to joke that it was payback as a camp staff member for all those years we had scared young scouts about Three-Fingered Willie. And of course, around this time, Friday the 13th movie was out. So there was all these talks, about monsters at scout camps and stuff. But that was payback. I don't think I slept a wink that night after the police showed up. When I first joined camp staff Camp Squanto was not that far away from us. And the trees still hadn't grown up that large, even in the early 70s from the fire. And so sound tended to carry. And you could hear, they had a large bell in the center of their camp, and they would ring it to call people to colors in the morning and in the evening. And so you would hear it, particularly if you were over, in lower camp by Tom Cullen Field and so on. You could hear it straight off from the woods. You could literally discern the direction. And actually, there was a trail. For some reason, I want to think it was a white trail at the time, but that you could actually hike straight through the woods to Camp Squanto. It would come out in the road in front of their camp. And I had hiked that many times. And so the big deal was, my brother could probably tell you more, but there would be a gentle competition between the camp staffs. At some point in the middle of the summer camp session, the Squanto camp staff would come and either steal the front Cachalot sign by the towers, or maybe the Tom Cullen sign. They would steal something and leave a note, so you knew it was them. And then, and it would be negotiated to be gotten back, for food or something. But then the Cachalot staff, and they would go and they would optimally try to steal the bell. And because it was only like bolted down with regular bolts in this concrete base. So one night I was invited as a CIT. I went with senior staff, and we stole the main Camp Squanto sign. Let me say we borrowed. We misappropriated for a short period of time the Camp Squanto sign, and I have a photo of us with the sign the next morning. So it was very common that camp staff would either earn a night off. They would have staff competitions in the patrols, and you'd get points. And usually it was Thursday night because nobody could be out during campfire night. And you'd earn a night off, and a senior staff member would drive you somewhere it was frequently either Hyannis or Wareham or something, and you'd have the night off. I can remember going with a number of camp staff members um, uh, to uh, to what was Lincoln Park on a Saturday late afternoon. We'd gotten back from camp, we changed, we all rushed off to Lincoln Park. Um, and I probably shouldn't say his name because now he's a distinguished career, but one of the camp staff just gorged himself on fried dough and on cotton candy and just all kinds of other stuff. And we were on I think it was either Tilt-a-Whirl or the Roundup. I think it was the Roundup where you stand up, you're in these cages and it spins and ultimately it goes vertical. We're in the Roundup and I'm to his right and I hear him say, "I don't feel well." I'm like, "Oh no." And sure enough, he got sick and vomited, but thankfully the Roundup was spinning in the opposite direction. The centrifugal force was to his right and not to his left where I was. But I remember him actually throwing up and the vomit almost being suspended in the air for a second, like we were in deep space as the wheel spun around and sadly spattered on everyone on the other side of the of the ride. And so, when we got off the ride, it was quite a mess, and we all had to pitch in to buy him a T-shirt right there at Lincoln Park because no one wanted to ride home in the car with him. The T-shirt he had on, and so that's probably my most memorable staff outing with about 5 or 6 of the staff at Lincoln Park, and I'm sure it was no doubt memorable for the people on the opposite side of the Tilt-a-Whirl. But we quickly got out of there. One of my strongest memories was I remember after dinner one night, the camp director, and this must have been Mr. Prefontaine, or I can't recall exactly who it was, but the camp director said the camp staff had to assemble behind the dining hall. And we were told we were going to end program areas. They had announced they were going to start program 15 minutes earlier and end 15 minutes earlier. And he wanted the camp staff up at the health lodge at like 8:30 or 8 or something. I don't remember the time. So we all trucked up there and we were redirected to the duplex, and they moved a TV up to the window, and we were sitting on the ground outside the window of the duplex and watched the president of the United States, President Nixon, resign from his office because of Watergate. And so that's one of my strongest memories of being on camp staff and the camp director deciding this was an historical moment that these scouts, and across the whole camp, everyone was listening to on radio, but we got to see the actual TV broadcast.